We have a very special guest, Hillary Fenton. You may have heard of her, and also Jennifer Olson on episode, was it 54 of the Salesforce for Everyone podcast? Yeah, maybe. It was a recent one. Um, Anyways, welcome, and I will let you take it away.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Anita. I'm going to pop over. I'll share my screen and we can get started. Let me put that up. Oh, hold on. Let's share screen here. All right. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming and taking some time out of your lunch hour to come and hang out with me here. So I'm going to talk about the admin guide to SOQL queries and SOQL. So a little bit about me. So my name is Hillary Fenton. I am the Salesforce and Business Systems team lead at a company called Calix. So I lead a team of 5 admins. I've been in the ecosystem for just about 2 years now. And so I mentioned these things, and you can see my certs at the bottom. And it's not a humble brag. I mentioned these things because I didn't really know about SOQL or use SOQL queries very much until about a year ago is when I really started getting into it. And so what I really want to talk about is why do I want to talk about SOQL queries? What difference does it make? Like, who cares? And it's something that I really wish that I had known when I first started in the ecosystem. And it can be super helpful, and you don't need anything special, which is something that I love about it. So we're going to talk about SOQL queries. We are going to look at the anatomy of a SOQL query. How do you build it? What are you pulling? How does that all work? Like a real, basic, nitty gritty. We're going to jump into, there's going to be a live demo. So I have a bunch of stuff set up in a demo org. So we're actually going to write some. This isn't just like a slide deck. We're going to get in there and get very interactive with this. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so first things first, what is SOQL? So SOQL stands for Salesforce Subject Query Language. And so this is used to search for data in your org. So there's a couple of little caveats here, then things to kind of remember. So SOQL searches data in your org. This is very similar to something you may have seen before called SQL, which is SQL. And that's something that's really common, and that's used in some other programming languages and a way to search through databases. There is also something else in Salesforce called SOSL, which is SOSL, and that is the Salesforce Object Search Language. All very similar things, all very confusing. So for myself, I think, especially at the beginning, the way that I would think about it to help me remember, what am I searching for? What tool do I use? SOSL would be like when you put something in your global search in Salesforce, right? When you're just putting in a keyword search, and you might get accounts, you might get something in a case record, you might get a knowledge article. It's a keyword search. Whereas SOQL is when you're putting together a report or you're putting together a list view. So those are kinds of the things that I would think of that would help you distinguish. There is some crossover between SOSL and SOQL, but we're really going to focus, and what we're going to really look at right now is SOQL queries. So here, there are some great resources. Of course, Salesforce has great resources about SOQL and SOSL. Shout out to Neil, who is a friend of mine. He has a really great breakdown and website with some resources for SOQL, Salesforce Ben. Stephen Trumbull also did a presentation, I think last year, about SOQL, and he really got into how it can be used with flows and to look at flow data, which I admittedly have not looked at very much, but he has a great talk. And so there will be I'll drop the links in the chat at the end. So if people want to go and bookmark stuff or have a look at them, there are great resources, and there's a ton of resources out there. So developers are really the ones that use SOQL more often than we do. So this is how they query the database. So it doesn't make sense for a developer to go and tell Apex to look at a report. That doesn't work. So they're using SOQL to query the database, to get information, to filter that data, and then to manipulate that data to either perform a DML, to do something with it, right? So this is what they're using to filter through their data. So what about admins? What are we going to do with it? Well, the amazing thing is that you don't need to know how to write code to write a SOQL query. And you don't need anything special. You will see in a lot of examples of people writing SOQL queries, they're writing them from the dev console or they're writing them in VS Code. You can, but you don't need to. You can write a SOQL query in tools you're probably already using, like Salesforce Inspector, Jetstream, Workbench. There is also an online SOQL building tool. And again, I'll put the link in the chat for this as well, for something that you want to bookmark. And it's just like an LWC SOQL query. And I think it's like through GitHub. And the amazing thing about these tools is that they will help you. They will help you write your query. And so we're going to get to that. So, okay, great. So it's this tool. You can query things. Why would I want to do this? So this is a really important one. Running a SOQL query is just looking. It doesn't change your data. So now think about that. You're running a query, just like when you run a report, right? It's not changing your data. But it's even better than a report because you can get exactly the fields that you need. You're not making a report. You're not making a new report type. There's no cleanup. You run your query, you look at your data. Maybe you're going to pull it into an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe you just need a quick look for something. Maybe you just need to copy paste an ID for something. And there's nothing left behind. You've extracted exactly what you need. There's no tech debt. So as a consultant, maybe you don't want to go into somebody's org and make a whole bunch of reports or create a whole bunch of list views that are automatically going to be tech debt as soon as you're done. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to do this whole crazy complex report to pull IDs and have all these filters on it. And you're going to pull an ID and do a data load and it's going to be useless. As soon as you make that data load, this report is useless. And now you have this report or got a report type that you've created that is just tech debt left behind. So that's something that's super cool. And what one of my most favorite features about this. SOQL queries are also like made for data loads. Like they are like cookies and milk because queries run on APIs, not on your field label. So when you're running a report, you see a field label. And I don't know about you, but I've been in my org and even when you go into dev orgs, sometimes your field label is not your API. And so it can get really tricky because sometimes field labels are the same. I mean, it's just real talk. It happens. So queries are great because they run on APIs. And it shows up and we'll see that it comes out into like this cute little table that you can literally like use almost immediately to do a data load. It's already formatted. It's ready to go. Your CSV can be exported. You're not hunting for APIs. You're not going back to the object looking like, oh, what was that API field? Like I got a label. Now you have to like close what you're doing and go somewhere else. No, like it's all there. There's even more reasons. So SOQL queries can also look at data that's not reportable or really not easy to report on. So just like in a report, you can pull objects and fields that are not on a tab or not on a page layout. So, I mean, that's super handy. If you just need to look at a field really quickly, instead of going and creating a report that you know you're going to have to go and add this field to, or you're going to have to go to the report type and like edit it and add a field, like you can just run a query and it will pull that information for you. So there's also some objects in Salesforce, a lot of objects I've learned that are hidden. So one of them would be like steps in an approval process. They all actually have their own like record ID. There's parts of user records that are not easily available. Maybe they're not in the UI. There's not really anywhere to go and look at them. Things like permission sets, content document link, if you're doing anything in Experience Cloud. Did you know that you could query list views? That was one that I learned rather recently. So basically, like when you're looking at a URL and there's like an ID in the URL, like that can be queried. Also, an important thing And something that's also a really cool feature is that SOQL queries respect object access and permissions. So if you don't have access to an object or a field, you can query it. You're not going to get any data. And so this is kind of cool. I've used it before in test scenarios. Like if I'm doing end user testing and I don't know, I'm testing as a sales user and I need to, I made a change on an account and I need to see accounts that they have access to because that's great. As like an admin, I can go and look and yeah, I verify it's there. But if that doesn't work in that user scenario, it's really difficult to validate that test. So you can log in as that user and then run a SOQL query as that user and get like a list of like accounts that they have access to or look at a field. So it's really cool because it's going to respect all of those object access. You don't have to worry about like permissions or people running a query that aren't supposed to. So a great and a neat little trick as well is that queries can traverse object relationships. And so I know that's kind of a lot to like think about and like identify. And we're going to see that in the demo, like how we can go through one object and reach in and grab information from another one. So this is really important, like objects that aren't linked in a report or objects that you would have to go and create a new custom report type for just to run like, I don't know, one, just to check one field or just to check, a specific scenario. So the way that they do this is what's called dot notation or an __r relationship. And so I know this doesn't make sense. Put a pin in it because we're going to talk about why this is important and what this means and how this all ties together. So let's talk about the anatomy of a SOQL query. What does it all mean? So every SOQL query starts with select, and select represents the fields that you're going to query. And so I know sometimes it seems weird because but that's how it starts. So you're always going to type in select. I usually start with select ID, and we'll see why when we start running queries, why that's important. And you can drop in any fields. So pretty much any field on that object, and then you can use those relationships to pull in data from other objects. And so all of these are going to run on APIs. And so custom fields are going to have that __C at the end. So once you decide on what fields you want to pull into your query, you'll get to from. And from is the object that you're running the query against. Is that your account? Is that leads? Is that campaigns? Is that contacts? Whatever it is. And again, you can do it with custom objects. You can query metadata. And so for custom objects, it's going to be that __C at the end. But just remember, this is your API again. Where is your conditions? So think of it like in a filter. If you're looking at a report or a list view, this starts to be your filters. And so you can put in where source equals web, where account status equals blank, where ID equals blank. And you start to filter down so that you don't have 10,000 accounts that come through. So another cool thing to note is it's not really like if you have these key pieces or key anatomy pieces for your query, it's not really picky how you write it. You can stack it. And sometimes you'll see queries written like this where you stack it, where you put select and you put all your fields, and then from, and then where, and you put all your fields, or you can just write it out into a string and just like run on sentence it all together. And everything, so in select, things are separated with a comma, and there's no comma at the end. And in where, if you have lots of where clauses, there is some syntax with it, but most of the time it is a comma. So, and you can continue to customize your queries with comparison operators. So things like equals, right? Where ID equals, or where ID doesn't equal. So the second one is actually doesn't equal. Where amount is greater than, where amount is less than. You can use things like, and this is one I don't have an example, and I thought about it last night. I don't have an example for a like. Like would be very similar to a keyword search. So you want to say where like account name or account name like United. And it's going to kind of look through your accounts and it's going to give you things that have United in the name. You can string your comparison operators together with things like and, in, not and, or. So you can get really complex. And you can also do things like nested queries. You can do aggregate queries where it's going to do a count for you, kind of like a rollup, but it's a little bit more streamlined. I don't have any aggregate queries in here, but know that it's something that you can go and you can kind of investigate as you build your skill and build your knowledge. But like full disclosure, like once you get, like if you have a super complicated query, you may actually be better off writing a report. And that's just like right tool for the right job, right? So I find I use queries a lot. And I find that for me, the ones that are kind of like lightweight, quick, get in, get out are the ones that are the most commonly used for me. But there are some instances where it's actually the only way you can get the data that you really want is through a complex query. So you just have to kind of weigh the pros and cons when you're thinking about doing a query versus a report. Okay, great. So now we know how to build a query. We know what a query is. How do you run it? Well, I don't know about you guys, but there is actually a module on Trailhead that is literally called SOQL for admins. And in this module, you have to create a new Apex class. You have to create a method. Then you have to create a query, loop through your data, and no, like you don't need to do it like that. Like great module, super cool. It's definitely not for admins. You don't need to do it like that. My personal favorite way is to actually run it in Salesforce Inspector. And that's really in the demo. That's what I'm going to show most is Salesforce Inspector because that's my favorite. But I know that you can run it in Jetstream. You can use Workbench. You can also use that LWC query builder. So the reason that we're using those and the reason that I really advocate and push for those is because they will help you build your query. So now think about that. You can run a query in like your dev console, but you have to know and be able to type out all the field names, all the underscore C's, all of the underscore R, all of the dot notations, everything. Like you have to know it. And so sometimes you do, and that's super cool. But if you don't, like let these tools work for you. So you can see here in this query that it's the same sample one that we saw earlier. You see all these blue fields down here. Like Salesforce Inspector has literally gone and pulled my metadata and is showing me what fields are available to select. And so I don't have to worry about what the relationship is. Is this a custom field? What was the API name again? Like it's all here and it will help you build your query. So you still have to kind of know what you're looking for. But in terms of like memorizing those kinds of things that I was talking about, like those relationships and those API names, like these tools will really help you to dig in there and like do some of the dirty work for you. Okay, so I'm going to jump out here and I'm going to pop over into my dev org because it is demo time. That guy. Okay, so we're in our org and I've created a few cases here. And let's go to, okay, so we have 7 different examples that we're going to go through, and I've kind of rated them as like simple, medium, or complex. All right, so in our first case here, somebody's opened a ticket and they're looking for a user with this username, and nothing is coming up in their search. Maybe they're getting like a duplicate error, or maybe they're just looking for somebody and they can't find it. And so I don't know about you guys, but you know, it is possible to have a username that's different from your email. And when you go into, let's just go to setup and we're going to search. We're going to search for this person because they're a user. They should have a username. Like, let's search for them. But you can't search by email, right? You can search by name, but you can't search by email. So sometimes it gets kind of frustrating. You're like, okay, well, who is this person? Like you could do some digging. Sometimes you can try global search. Sometimes global search will come out and it will give you an idea or it'll point you in the right direction. But instead of kind of spinning your wheels, we can run a query. So I'm going to clear this out. So I don't know if you guys saw. So I have Salesforce Inspector installed here. Oh gosh, I have a big query in here. I have Salesforce Inspector installed in my browser. It's connected to my demo org. So I'm going to copy our email for our person. And so I've also dropped in for myself the query that I'm going to use. So what we're going to do, all of our queries, they start with select. So we're going to put in select, and I'm going to start with ID. And the reason I'm going to start with ID is that there's almost always an ID that you're pulling. And we're going to come back to the rest of our fields from, and we are looking at a user record in this instance, okay? And so now it's pulled, like see how like it's already automatically populated all these fields that are available, right? And I'm going to say where, and we were looking at an email. So we could look at email, we could look at username. I think it was username. Where username, and so you can just click on it and it'll like populate that info for you. Equals, and if I'm looking specifically for this email, so I'm going to put like the single, I don't know, I want to say quotes, single quote, going to put in my email. Okay, so usually you can start very basic, super simple, right? So let's run it. I got a hit, but this isn't helpful to me. It's just a name, like an ID. I guess I could cut it and paste it like in the URL and try to find out more. But so now that it knows that we're pulling from the user, if I just add a comma here, all my user fields come up and I could just click on them. So what's more helpful than an ID? Well, a name is helpful, right? Maybe we want to look at, I don't know, an account. And so here, you'll notice that it populated with a dot. So this is what we're talking about with that dot notation. And so now you can start looking at fields from the account. Maybe you could look at the account number, the account address, but you could also look at something like account.name. Hey, it's this person. I don't have an account name in here. Let's look at their email. Right? So we can see like their username and their email are different. So this person, so I can say, oh, this person, it is Carlotta, and her email and her username are different. Maybe she got married and she actually goes by Carly. I don't know. But you see how it's that lightweight, that's super quick. And once you get used to it, it becomes really fast. So let's go to our second case here. In this view. Okay. So in our second case here, we've created a new account record type. Cool. Okay. So now what we're saying is accounts with specific criteria that have the type customer, customer channel, and a null rating should be assigned to this record type. So this is something that you'd usually do by like data loader or maybe like a mass update tool, but there's no IDs in here. There's not really a whole lot like that the person gave you, right? You have this new record type and you need to assign it to some accounts. Okay, cool. But like this would be something really manual, right? Like record type isn't always on your page layout. So you'd have to go like to the object, go to the record type, maybe like pull it from like the URL. But you can really quickly go and pull. You can query by record type. So we're going to pull our query here. And we're going to go back to Salesforce Inspector. I'm going to paste it. Oh, I'm going to paste it in here. Right up here. Where is my case? Okay. That is for, here's our record type. Okay. Okay. So again, we've gone and we put select. We're looking for our ID, the name, and this name is going to be the name of the record type. Where the object equals account. Cool. So now we have in a cute little table our record type IDs. So if you're doing a mass update, or if you need to check and see like, what is this record type ID? You have a cute little table here. And it could be for some objects that you have. Maybe you have 5, 6, 7, 8 record types. Maybe they have very similar names. So this is really cool. Like it just gives it to you like in a cute little table. And then what you could do, this is kind of a 2-for-1 in this case. We're gonna query accounts that meet their criteria. Right? So you're saying any account with the type customer channel and a null rating should be assigned to this new record type. And so that's it. You can just replace it, right? You don't have to like go and like save your report, go and open a new report, go and find a report, go and make a new report. You just delete it because there's nothing left behind. There's no like, I don't want to say garbage, but you know what I mean? Like there's no trail left behind for you. You've run this query, you're done with it, on to the next one. So to come up. And so I left record type ID in my query here because literally now you could like export this to Excel and just drop in that new record type ID right there in the field that has the API already populated. And then you update. And it's like super quick, right? Like again, how that like data loader is like made for SOQL queries. It makes it super fast and super easy. I don't need to export a report and then reformat it and delete all the extra lines or go and find an API. Like everything's here. And like I can just drop it right in. All right, we're going right along. All right, our next person, I'm trying to create a dynamic dashboard. And I get an error that says our dashboard limit has been reached. So I know in most orgs, I know by org, it varies a little bit. I think like 10 is like the maximum you can have. It might be 5, it might be 3, like depending on your org. But yeah, maybe we could tell her like, yep, there sure are. There's 10 in use. These are what they're called. Wouldn't that be super cool? Instead of like going and like trying to figure out like, or going and like looking in dashboards and trying to open them. I think we have hundreds, if not thousands of dashboards in my org. Like sometimes it's just like at scale, some things are just not really doable or would just be such a waste of, not a waste, but an inefficient use of your time. So you can actually query dashboards. And so what we're going to query here, and again, we're just going to straight up like delete this. We're done with that query. On to the next. So we're going to we're going to look for the ID and the title from the object we're looking at is dashboard. And the criteria here is where type doesn't equal specified user. So a specified user is like run this dashboard as a specified user. So let's go. So I created a whole bunch of dashboards so that we could see. Yeah, so this is the ID. This is the title for the dashboard. So I could go and look at them. You could go even further. Like you could look at like last modified. You could look at created by. And again, we don't think in terms of things like ID, but by using dot notation, you can go through and get like created by dot name, because that's how we think, right? We think in terms of a name, like who created this dashboard? When was it last modified? Like who can I go and ask and say, hey, you created this dashboard. Are you still using it? Right. And so it's super easy. You can just, again, that kind of lightweight where you can just keep adding fields, or as you talk to your user, person to open the ticket, you could say, oh yeah, there's, 4 dashboards already. We only have 4 available. And they say, well, who created them? Oh, okay, let's go and look. This is who they were created by. When did they get created? Oh, I don't know. Let's look. If I can spell. Create a date and just drop it in. And again, the last one doesn't have a comma, so don't get caught in that. Right? And you can just start pulling, just dropping in data, just like with a report, right? Where you kind of have to drag and drop, except you're not waiting for your report to reload. You're not looking at a preview and then waiting for it to reload. It's just automatically like you press export and it refreshes. So cool. So yeah, it looks like I created a whole bunch of dashboards and I've used up all of our dynamic dashboard allowance. All right, we're going to do one more simple one, but it's actually a good use case. Okay, so a user, Fox, has had a role change, but it requires a manual permission set assignment because they are, I don't know, maybe they're going into like a system admin role. Maybe it's outside of the scope of your like onboarding or offboarding automation. Most user provisioning has some sort of automation in most orgs at some point. But you will inevitably run into a scenario where there is some manual update or some sort of manual process that needs to happen. And so here I'm saying we can give them, they need to have the same access as this specific person, right? So in their case, we're saying, okay, Fox needs to have the same access that I do. Okay, great. I don't know about you, I have a ton of permission sets in my org. And so usually what would we do? Have the two users open and like stare and compare. Okay, that's great if they have like 3 permission sets. But what if they have 10, 20, 30, 40 permission sets? And permission sets can have very similar names. They can get a little bit dicey. So again, when we talk about like, good use of time, ease, the ease of doing a data load or doing this by mass update. So what we're doing here, this one looks crazy, right? Like much more complicated, but it's really, we're just pulling through and pulling names, we're pulling permission set IDs. So let's break this one down. So we're selecting the ID, our permission set ID, our permission set dot name, because I don't think in terms of permission set ID. I think of names. We're getting the profile ID, a profile name, the assignee ID, and the assignee name. And we're looking at that from the object that we're looking at is permission set assignment. And I'm saying where the assignee name equals me. I might say assignee ID equals and put my user ID. You could do it that way as well. But sometimes it's easier for us to think about things in terms of a name because that's how we think. I don't know my user ID by heart. So let's run this. So what comes out in here? It looks a little bit crazier, right? But really what it's saying is that this is your permission set ID in this third column. This is the permissions, and it's saying that's from permission set. This is our permission set name. And then, so the top one up here, this is a profile. So there's the profile and the profile name. Sorry, the profile ID, profile name. This is my assignee ID and my name. A lot of info in here. And sometimes, I don't know, maybe I'm bad because I pull a lot of info, but sometimes it just helps me to see like an ID and a name. And this is going to tell you like where this is coming from. Also, one of the great things about this is that you'll see this first column always pops up, and that's the object you're pulling from. So if you're doing a data load and you're like, I can't remember like what object does this go to? It's going to show you here like which object this data came from. So if you're looking to put up, data back into that object, you kind of have a little cheat here because it's already telling you what object you're going to. So this is really handy because if I wanted to copy all of these permission sets to a new person, I would literally export this to Excel, like delete these middle, like all of this middle stuff, change the assignee ID to the new person you want to assign to. You have your permission set IDs right here, all of them. Doesn't matter if you had 2 permission sets or 50, they'd all be there. And then you just press upload or you do update, right? And you've updated like 50 permission sets by running one query and doing, a very small like data manipulation like in Excel. You've just switched out an ID. But like because all of your APIs are there, you've pulled all of the data that you need to run a data load, like everything is here for you. And so it's really, to me, it's a much better use of time than going and like staring and comparing and like looking at two profiles or looking at permission set assignments and like, okay, like this one, like contact center agent, contact center admin, like contact center supervisor. Like when you look at these all together, like they're all going to blur together. But this is great because it breaks it down for you in a really simple way, in a way that's easy to kind of view and digest. And you can export this. Like if you do copy format to Excel, you literally press the button and like open Excel. I think I have some Excel open. And like drop it in. And now you can do whatever manipulation you wanted to do in Excel. So like if I wanted to data load this, I delete the fields I don't need. I would update the assignee ID to the new person's ID. And then just like do my upload. I can even do it from Salesforce Inspector, right? You just go into the other tab and you go into like import to do your data load. So you don't need to leave. Like you kind of stay in here. You don't need to log out. You don't need to log in anywhere else unless you want to use data loader. That's fine. That's fine too. Okay. So everybody still with me more or less? I can't see the chat. So we'll get to, I don't know if you want me to pause here and look at questions or we should keep going.
Yes, there is one question.
Yeah.
From Conrad. I would not have known the object permission set assignment. What is the documentation to know what the objects are and what they are used for in an org?
Like, is there like a master document somewhere that has like every object? Probably in Salesforce documentation, hidden, buried somewhere. I'll jump a little bit ahead of myself here and say, like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel when you're doing a query. If you think that there is like 99% chance that somebody somewhere has posted in Stack Exchange, Trailhead Help, that they're looking to find like, hey, I need to see a SOQL query for all the permission sets assigned to a user. And like, if you Googled that, you would get a ton of like stuff that's in Stack Exchange, different forums, Trailhead Help, where somebody's already answered and built this query. And so sometimes like, I don't know what object, and I'm curious about it, right? I want to know, like, is this possible? Because it's got to be possible. There has to be a way like to, programmatically, right, that this is happening. But I don't know all the objects. And yeah, I wish there was like a master document, and there probably is buried in like Trailhead documentation or like Salesforce documentation.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
People responded. There's developer documentation that provides details for the objects. You can always check out Schema Builder in your org to show your objects. Then org check manage package.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the link has been shared for that, I think, developer document.
Yeah. Cool. There's a ton of documentation out there. For me, sometimes I cheat and I will like Google it if I think like, yeah, like this is possible. Like I'm pretty sure this is possible. I will Google it. ChatGPT also like could be your friend, and help you find some of these objects that are hidden, right? That we don't see every day or that we don't necessarily know about, but we still have access to, and we can still use them like to help us write like these really powerful queries. So that's a great question. And yeah, I kind of had to jump ahead of myself here because that was going to be some of my ending comments, but we'll get there.
Yeah, there's a few more if you're ready for questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. Amin asks, if I want to query all the fields from an object, do I have to name all of them, or is there a better way to do it?
It depends. Like sometimes when you want to see all the fields on an object, like there is a setting, I believe, that's like fields all, and it doesn't list them. It lists them literally like across here. It will show like all of the fields, like right across the top here. So if you said like, I think it's like fields all like from account or whatever, it'll just show them like all the way across. It's not always super useful, but it will show it. Some of those things translate a little bit better, like programmatically, like when you do actually run it in Apex. But yeah, this is To me, I would use it more so when it's a little bit more narrow and like if there's a specific field that I'm looking for. But it is possible. It just doesn't give it to you in a nice way. Like it just, I think when I've tried to do it in the past, it's just literally like across the top. It's just like every single field API.
Cool. All right, another question from Eric. Have you ever used ChatGPT to get your queries? They have worked a bit for me sometimes.
Yeah, I find it really hit or miss with chat also. And that was just in general. Maybe I'm not drinking enough of the AI Kool-Aid yet. I have found more luck, like just doing like a straight like Google search. Usually when you get and you look at forums like Stack Exchange, you're looking at Trailhead Help, there's some conversation happening about it, right? And sometimes you're able to educate yourself a little bit into why something's not possible, or they have other suggestions, right? Like for instance, like this query, right? If you Googled like SOQL query for all permission sets assigned to a user, you'll get a ton of hits. And there'll be some conversation about it, right? Like if you're looking for, and it'll give a little bit of background or help you understand like what that query is. But yeah, chat I find hit or miss. I kind of like when a person has answered a query. And I find Trailhead Help is super helpful as well. If you put it on there, people almost always answer, or you find, better yet, you find where someone else has already asked the question and there's been lots of conversation about it. And sometimes there's different variations on a query. So it's kind of like how I mentioned here, you could do like assignee ID or assignee name, like it's the same thing. And so, but just knowing that things are possible and like taking it back to your org and like maybe going and like playing with the fields a little bit or trying something out, to me, the most helpful. But I like that person, that real live person touch though.
I think that was it for questions in the chat.
Okay. Cool. We'll do one more, maybe like a medium one, and then because I know we're coming up on time. Um, so we'll do a medium one because this one is kind of an interesting use case, and I feel like will resonate with a lot of people here. Okay, so this person Rose has opened a ticket. Hey, these people with this email need to have their lead source updated to partner referral. Like, I don't know about you guys, I have seen a ton of requests where there's no ID, right? Rose hasn't really given us much here. She's given us an email. There's no name, there's no account, there's no ID. And so this can be really challenging because sometimes if you push back to the stakeholder and like, hey, what's the account, what's the user ID? I don't know. They don't know what a user ID is. They don't know what a contact ID is. And furthermore, you kind of have to ask yourself whether they really should know what those things are. Did this come from a report? No, they signed up for a Zoom meeting. And this is the information that we got from Zoom. So this can be a really tough one for you, like as an admin, right? Because in this case, there's just these 5 people. But what if it was 50 people? And it was like, add all these people, update their lead source. And so your option is to like literally like drop these emails into like global search and like get their IDs, like, I don't know, like run a report and get like all of your contacts and like do like a VLOOKUP. Like there are some things you could do, but you can also use a SOQL query. And so this is going to be one where we're going to look at in. And so we'll break this one down. Okay, so what is happening here? So let's export it. So we're going to select the name, the ID, the email, from contact, where, email, and we're saying in. So this is one of those like comparison operators we talked about. And we've listed them out here. We put them in parens because there's more than one. And we've dropped in the only information that we had, which was email, right? You could sub this in for name. You could sub this in for any kind of other username. Unique identifiers are best for this because otherwise you will get duplicates. Maybe you want duplicates though. Maybe you want to see where the duplicates are. You want to see that, I don't know, maybe Billy has like 6 different like contacts. Maybe you want to see that. So depending on your use case, you have to be a little bit careful with it. But in this case, we're saying we're looking at contacts and we're looking to see where email in. So it's kind of like email equals. And look, now we have our IDs just like that. And we can take this and data load it. We could make it even easier for ourselves because we could say, what were we doing? Lead source? We could add lead source to our query so that if we're doing a data load, we literally just like copy this. We could strip out name and email because if you're using data loader, you don't need that. You just need their ID. Or you could leave it whatever you want. But literally like everything you need here for a data load is right here. Your ID, you're going to drop in the lead source to whatever it is, whatever the update is supposed to be. And you've got it right here. And you have found your IDs like in record time. And I get requests like this, not all the time, but often enough. And I think I've done this query with as many as like 200, like in like emails, where somebody just gave us like a really like one identifier and we needed to like find an ID. So that's that one. It's up to you guys. We can do one more. We can do a complex one, or we can call it and we can just kind of wrap it. What do you guys think? We'll peek at the complex one. Because this is one where we talked about a little bit about the idea of nested queries or like a subquery. So at our company, we're having an audit and we need to find a list of profiles that have modified all access to these 3 objects. Right? And so sometimes these requests, we can't say no, right? We have to find a way. And so this would be either going to profiles and checking on the account, like what do they have? Do they have this modify all access? Or we can try to help ourselves and run a query. Okay, this one is super long. So we're looking for the profile ID, the profile name from permission set. And we're saying where is owned by profile, and that's like where the permission is owned by the profile, equals true. And that ID, that profile ID is in. So we're doing this like subquery. And like, back to like what Conrad was saying, like, how do you always know? And like, sometimes you don't know. You don't know that these are the objects that you need to query from, but you can look at resources to help you find those things. You can run like a Google search and be like, hey, how do I find this? Or you have a similar query and you can just modify it. So I know this one is a little bit crazy. And so we have here at the end, we have an order by. I haven't really touched on that, but you can add at the end, you can add order by, which is like how you want to see your data presented. You can put limit. So if you just wanted to see a few sample cases or a few sample accounts, you can add limit 10, limit 1, limit 50. So if it's something that is going to have a big return, you're going to, if you queried all accounts, right, you would get 500 accounts, but you can limit it. So there are some things you can append at the end to help you like streamline even more. So here in this case, these profiles have this permission to modify all records. And this is our object. And we can switch out objects just by changing what's in here. We could change this to account. And it changes and it updates, right? We could change this to, I can't remember what was in my case, but I'm just going to put a few objects here so we can, just as an example, things like lead. And so you could export that or refund. And you could export these little data tables, right? These little, results that you get. And compile it together or send it, reply back in your email, right? These profiles have access to these objects. Let's go back to account for a second, because you can also change. And this is where like, it's really just kind of like playing with your query, right? Like, what else can I pull in here? What can I change? You can change your permission. You can change this instead of modify all. You can change it to create. If you just wanted to see what profiles can create an account. If you just want to see what profiles can read an account. A much bigger result, right? So it's highly flexible and it's quick to make those changes on the fly. And yeah, it's super fun. So, but you've done a little bit of like sometimes fiddling with or playing with. These are super generic queries also, like that I've tried to do really minimal like customization in the org, because the idea is you could go and run this query in your org and do exactly what I'm doing here and change out, your select fields to go and change your S objects and kind of have something to play with, but that is a successful like query that you could run and you'll get results. And then you can start and kind of like play from there. So I will stop the demo there. I'll go back into my slide deck real quick and we'll just wrap it up and hopefully we'll have just a few more minutes at the end. So final takeaways. I think I touched on it. I touched on it at the end here when we were talking to Conrad. So just be curious. Like if you think you could do it in a report, try to run a query. Try and see what happens. Don't reinvent the wheel or the query. Like look for help. I would happily stand on the shoulders of people who have done this and are way smarter than me to help me find the query. You still have to understand what you're looking for, what the outcome you want is, but look and see, and you'll see all kinds of cool queries out there. And like, I think 99% of the time I have found exactly what I wanted, or something that is like, gets me like 75% of the way there. And then I can just go and like take myself to the end and add in, those custom fields or those little tweaks that I need. You don't have to memorize all your queries. Save them. Save your queries. I know in Salesforce Inspector, there is like an option you can save queries. You can also save them to a document. If there's something that's helpful, like don't lose them, save them. And then just practice. Like even if you make your report, try to run a query on the side and see if you get the same results. Just to kind of help you like going with it. And yeah, so thank you everybody. Thank you for taking your time. I know our time is precious, so I really appreciate everybody. Great questions. Connect with me for sure. That's my QR code for my LinkedIn. You can scan me and connect with me. And I think that we still have a couple minutes, last 5 minutes, like for any questions or anything anybody wants to talk about or comments, questions.
There are two questions, and there was a request on a query, but I don't think we have time for that. Let me scroll up. Janina, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Her question was, do you ever use sorting in a query, or do you sort later in Excel?
You can sort in a query. You can do like order by. So like if you were looking at accounts, if you're looking at accounts, you could order by status. Or if you were looking at contacts, right? And you wanted all, I don't know, your active contacts from Texas. And then at the end, you would order by account or account name or account ID. And it'll show you and it'll do some sorting for you. But usually for big data sets, usually going into Excel and doing any like fine tuning is what I would do. But you can sort. You can also, we talked about limit, right? Where you could like limit how many results you get, which is helpful too. Cool. You said there's one more?
Yeah, from Crystal. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce these in the different ways. I'm going to spell them out just in case. So, will some of the SQL commands work for the most part, will some of the SQL commands work for the most part? The SOQL syntax looks really similar.
It is very similar. but it is not always forgiving. If you have an extra comma, if you have something that doesn't belong, that it doesn't recognize, your query won't run. So there are some very specific syntax needed. Same for SOQL, right? Like there is very specific syntax for SOQL that is not used for SOQL. So I know all the names are all like very jumbled together, but the concept is very similar. If you're familiar with SQL, that idea of like, I think it's kind of like navigating like through like folders. I'm not very good at SQL. So this is kind of my own kind of extrapolation. It's a very similar concept, especially when you talk about like using dot notation and like reaching through and like pulling data through those relationships.
Thank you. And the last one was a request to do a parent to child and child to parent query, but we only have 3 minutes.
Yeah. I tried not to do too much like I said, too many like complex like changes to the org so that people could just go and like run these queries, or like if you're watching the replay, like seeing the query and like typing it out for yourself and like having it actually run like in your dev org or in your sandbox. So yeah, when you do those like parent to child, then you get into like .r relation, like _ r relationships. And so it is possible, but I tried to find like a relationship like natively like available in this like brand new dev org, and I couldn't really find one. So I don't know, maybe I didn't dig hard enough, but there is some great documentation through Salesforce that has examples of those like relationships and how to go up and down like through those relationships.
This was amazing.
Cool. I'm glad. Like it's good turnout. I'm glad people are interested in SOQL. I sometimes I feel like a crazy person because I use it like every day.
No way. I really like your teaching style, and I kind of want like a Hillary's top 10 most used queries now.
It was hard. Like actually the most challenging part in this was like trying to find ones that would run natively like in this dev org without much like manipulation or like custom fields, because like they don't really give you much, right? Like it's kind of like generic in those dev orgs, and like a lot of mine have like are really niche, but kind of that's the idea, right? Like instead of doing like a report, you can run this very niche query without leaving any like data like report or report type garbage behind.
Very cool.
So cool.
All
Hey,
right.
awesome.
We're
Thank you. Thank
1
you,
minute.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining today. Have a good rest of your day. Thank
Thanks.
you.